In this video, we'll look at some highlights of the Union Budget 2018 and review it. We'll try to understand and decode what it means when certain things have been mentioned in such a way that it goes right over our head at first sight. I've also made a video on last year's budget. In case you want to watch it, the link is there in the description. You can watch it to learn about some economic terms and definitions that you feel is relevant. So without any further ado, let's begin. I'm not going to repeat what the finance minister has said in the budget, so I'll just highlight it and you can pause the video and read it, and I'll just begin with the explanation. So the first thing that I saw in the budget was fiscal situation. It said fiscal deficit is 3.5% of GDP. Now, always remember this point. If the fiscal deficit is lower in percentage, then it's a good thing for a country. So what is fiscal deficit? Now, deficit means debt, or in Hindi we call it as curse, which have been accumulated not just for one single year, it has been accumulated over the years. In simple terms, the plural of debt is deficit. So when do you think a government will have a deficit? Or think about it this way, when will you have a debt or curse? Suppose your revenue is X and your expenditure is Y. When your expenditure increases, your revenue cannot support it, meaning if your Y is more than X, that is when you have a debt, because you will then borrow money to meet your demands. Similarly, when a government's total expenditures exceeds the revenue that it generates, or in other words, when a government spends more money than it brings in during the fiscal year, that's when a government goes into a deficit. And the word fiscal is related to government's revenue, especially taxes. So when we hear fiscal deficit, we are just referring to the revenue generated through taxes, and it does not include money from borrowings because a country borrows money both domestically and internationally. That's why we have to exclude the borrowings and only consider the tax revenue while calculating the fiscal deficit. And fiscal deficit is always seen in comparison with GDP, because if the fiscal deficit percentage is high, then it will bring the GDP down. You see, when fiscal deficit is high, then it means the government has no money. And if you don't have any money, you will then borrow money. Similarly, the government also borrows money. And it borrows from the central bank, or sometimes government borrows from the public by issuing bond or running some government welfare schemes. And then government also borrows from other countries and institutions like IMF and World Bank. A lot of times the tax money or the tax revenue is not sufficient to support a nation's development. That's when the government looks for the option of borrowing. So now you see, high fiscal deficit becomes a hindrance in nation's development, because then we will have to borrow. And once you borrow, then you will also have to pay a higher rate of interest. So whenever you see lower fiscal deficit number, then it's a good thing for a country. All right, let's go to the next point. So 5,97,000 crore, I hope I just pronounced it correctly. Yeah. So rupees 5,97,000 crore has been allocated for infrastructure. Let's look at the explanation here. So it is a well-known fact that the infrastructure is the growth driver of the economy. I mean, not just Indian economy, any economy. And frankly, our country needs massive investment in infrastructure. When we say infrastructure, we refer to the construction of roads, airports, railways, inland waterways, and other investments that provide good quality services to the people. And in this year's budget, government has allocated rupees 5,97,000 crore. So last year it was around 4,94,000 crore. I'll just briefly tell you where all this money has been allocated under infrastructural development. So in this allocation, the major part of it is given to the transport sector for the construction and expansion of roads and highways, so that connectivity increases, businesses and trade. You see, money is required for the construction of toll plaza and collecting revenue and many highway related safety mechanisms. So all these things require money. Likewise, a good amount of money has also been allocated to repairing of infrastructures that get damaged due to disaster. Then another portion of the money also goes in development of tourist sites and heritage sites, because tourism brings in a lot of money and it also gives employment to local citizens. Then you also must have heard about this government scheme called AMRUT, AMRUT, which stands for Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation. Now this scheme was launched in 2015, and the focus of this scheme is to transform urban and rural living conditions by upgrading infrastructures like pipelines for sewage networks and water supply. Another infrastructural investment goes in the civil aviation sector. So the government of India plans to expand many airports so that it can handle more trips in a year. Now, I don't need to say this, these kind of ideas always comes from looking at data. Clearly, domestic airport traffic has increased over the years. And if you can recollect, a scheme called UDAN, UDAN, that was launched last year in 2017, through which the government planned to increase regional connectivity by air. So you see, all these schemes are part of infrastructural development. When investment in infrastructure is done, it also makes way for employment and skill development. So try to interrelate things like investment in infrastructure leads to employment, and that will again give rise to skill development because people would like to enhance their skill for a specific job. And then it also somehow connects to tourism, and tourism brings a lot of revenue. Again, tourism also gives employment, and now when you think of tourism, then immediately relate to airports and roadways. Again, these sectors need investments, so try to integrate and form your understanding and arguments. Let's move on to the next point. NITI Aayog to initiate a national program on artificial intelligence. I think you must have heard about this new upcoming job profile called data science and big data. So this kind of job profile needs some coding skills to extract data, and then you would also need statistical skills to actually interpret the data as to turn raw data into some meaningful discovery. So there is a great demand for this job profile, and there are many courses that are being offered these days on data science. So anyways, the whole idea is to extract knowledge and insights from data and then feed it into a computer system so that the computer performs a given task just as if a human intelligence is performing a task. Some examples of artificial intelligence is how Google shows you relevant topics when you put in your required keywords in Google search. Then if you go on Amazon, when you click on a product, below the product, you can see how there's another relevant product which is available at a certain price if you buy both the products together. So all these are examples of artificial intelligence. And many of the developed countries' governments are already using artificial intelligence for the smooth delivery of public service and also to reach their political agendas. Now even India wants to do it. Now this program has been undertaken by NITI Aayog. It will establish a national program to conduct research and development in these areas. Now, artificial intelligence is a modern technological discovery. So naturally, the government has to team up with some private partners. That means there has to be a government department which will take up the responsibility of making things happen with a private partner. And the government body is Department of Science and Technology that will take care of all this initiative. Now I'll give you a very good example of what the government plans to do with the help of modern technology. Just look at your Aadhaar card. If you see, it is mandatory to link Aadhaar card to almost all these services that you and I can avail. That means with a person's Aadhaar card number, you can see the history, both past and present services that a particular person is availing, which will help the government to monitor and also to create demand if at all it is necessary. Because when you have people's information, that's all you need to create supply and demand. But then it is not as easy as it seems. With so much of personal information, there's also a concern regarding cybersecurity. So India needs technological infrastructure that can allow the government to distribute these digital information to private parties for delivering services. But at the same time, the government is responsible for the misuse of personal information. So it's a good thing that the government of India is investing in national programs on artificial intelligence, because it means that there will be a huge demand in the job market for people having skills in this sector. However, one should not be surprised if the government utilizes citizens' personal data for political purposes. Because as I said, whoever controls data is the most powerful and has the ability to shape the world. So if you're someone who loves analyzing data, then now is the good time to enhance your skills because you will be in demand. Alright, let's go to the next point. Disinvestment crossed target of rupees 72,500 crore to reach rupees 1 lakh crore. Okay, so here's the explanation. When we hear the word disinvestment, you need to immediately recollect the time when the government of India decided to sell its share in the public sector undertakings, PSUs. I think many of you know that the government of India is running into loss for running PSUs, that is public sector undertakings. So I'm talking about Hindustan Petroleum Corporation, then ONGC, Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, then SAIL, Steel Authority of India, GAIL, Gas Authority of India, BSNL, Air India. All these government companies are running in loss for a long period of time. I mean, all the government companies are part of India's socialist idea, but now India is slowly moving towards capitalism. In a capitalist economy, a government hardly produces anything. Its role is limited to regulation and administration. Even Government of India is on that track. So when you hear this line, disinvestment crossed target of rupees 72,500 crore, what it means is whenever the government plans a budget, one thing you need to understand is that there are revenues and then there are expenditures. The revenue comes from tax and expenditure is the receipt, that is funding for infrastructure, pensions, salaries, running welfare schemes, etc. Now, one more thing that you need to understand is there's always a cash flow shortage, meaning not enough money is generated through collection of tax. To fill that shortage, the government sells some of its properties, and those properties are basically government companies. And obviously, you will try to sell that property which is causing loss. So this year, the government has set a target of 72,500 crore to be generated by selling some stakes of its own companies. But then the target has exceeded and is about to reach 1 lakh crore. That means two of the things may have happened. Either the government has sold an entire company, or the prices of the company stocks are very high, so the government is able to manage by selling a little percentage of company share. So the bottom line is, it is the PSUs, that is public sector undertakings, which are the government companies. These are heavily funding the government's disinvestment programs. By selling these companies, government is able to overcome the cash flow shortage. But a good question to think about is, when all the PSUs are gone, meaning when government is done selling all the PSUs, then what will the government do to overcome the cash flow shortage? Well, if you have time, then think about it. We now move on to the next one. Just pause and read the point. Basically, what this means is that the government is giving tax breaks to firms that are promoting post-harvest activities. Now, these are companies that handles storage, processing, packaging, transportation, and marketing of agricultural goods. So these companies are part of FMCG sector, that is fast-moving consumer goods. They make all these products that we consume on daily basis. That means the government of India is giving almost 100% tax deduction to these companies, only if their annual turnover is up to rupees 100 crore. Again, what you need to understand is, whenever a government gives such an incentive, in this case giving 100% tax deduction, the government does that to boost the activities of that sector. Because once a farmer produces, it is all in the hands of these companies who are the primary buyers. Because obviously a farmer will not have that much of capital to store, to process, or to market their produce. So these companies come into the picture, and the government is giving them incentive in the form of a tax cut. Now, when we know that it's a positive move for these agro companies, you need to immediately think whether there is any government scheme which promotes everything that we just spoke about. There is a scheme called Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana. Now, the aim of this scheme is to create infrastructure with efficient supply chain management from a farm to a retail outlet. So you see, in a way, government is giving a boost to the Prime Minister Krishi Sampada Yojana. So in a nutshell, the government is giving tax incentive to agro companies in a hope that it will boost their operational activities, which will in turn help the farmers in raising their incomes. And many times in Prime Minister's speech, you have heard that he talks about doubling the income of farmers by the end of 2022. So try to relate and think about it. You will get the picture. And just in case if you're interested in knowing that what are the negative effect of giving such huge tax incentives, then think about it this way. 100% tax deduction means paying no tax at all. But then the clause is only if a company's turnover is 100 crores. Then only the government will give you 100% tax deduction. Now let's assume you have an agro company and your company's turnover is 200 crores. Then what you're going to do is you will divide your company into two different parts and get it registered in the name of a family member. And now these two companies can easily avail the tax incentives because they are now each having turnover of 100 crores. That means these two companies don't have to pay any tax. Now like this, the companies don't pay tax. Then what do you think the government is going to do to fill the tax revenue shortage? Obviously, the government will come behind people like you and me. Either the government will increase direct tax or indirect tax. So this is one downfall of giving such huge tax deduction. Now let me take it to another level. Let's say due to some pressure, the government is not able to impose heavy tax on the citizen because the citizens don't like it. They will not vote for the government next time. Now what do you think the government will do? Now the government has two problems. They're giving 100% tax to the companies, and then they also cannot impose high tax on the citizens just to cover up the revenue. So the government will then go for the third option, and the third option is borrowing. Government will borrow money from the rich private corporations because they have money, and the capitalist will lend the money only if the rate of interest is high. Just try to understand the cycle. By giving tax incentive to the companies, the government is now borrowing money at high interest rate from the companies. That increases the government's debt. If the government is in debt, you and I will bear the cost. So this is one downfall of giving such huge tax deduction. And the next point is also on the similar note. Corporate tax rate reduced to 25% for companies with turnover up to 250 crore. Now this announcement will benefit the entire micro and small and medium enterprises who files their tax returns. Now in last year's budget it was 30%. It has been reduced to 25% this year. And companies with a higher turnover will continue to pay 30% corporate tax. You see, it's a clear example of how a small business with high turnover will try to underreport their yearly income, because firms will try to do that to stay in the rupees 250 crore bracket so that a low tax rate applies to them. And in the previous point, I have given you the example. Suppose there's a family-owned business that generates 300 crores as annual income. What they will do is they will break it into two separate businesses owned by members of their family, each worth 150 crore, just to be under the 250 crore bracket and pay lower taxes. But then the positive side is that small businesses that do not have more than 250 crore turnover will start to increase, because always remember, any kind of tax cut is an incentive by the government to promote businesses. And not to mention, if corporations pay less tax, then the government will come behind the citizens, or the government will start borrowing at higher rate of interest, and that will also create debt. Alright, let's go to the next one. I want you to pause the video and read this point. Now, when the government of India says it will launch world's largest health protection scheme, of course, it is very ambitious of our government to think so. Clearly, it reminds me of another country, that is the United Kingdom, that have the similar program called the NHS, National Health Service, which is the publicly funded national healthcare system for England and one of the 4 national health services of the United Kingdom. It is also the largest public funded healthcare system in the world, and it has been running successfully. So you see, the government of India is trying to adopt a similar system of the UK. But right now the NHS in UK is failing, and it is due to government's mismanagement. The money is being used in the most ineffective way. Now I want you to think about it. Right now healthcare in India is also not that great. Even if you want a health policy or insurance, you know the charges are different for those who pay in cash and for those who pay with insurance policy. Even under insurance, private insurance has different rates and government insurance has different rates. And needless to say, today one visit to hospital at an average will cost you around 60% of your annual salary. So this is the present scenario of healthcare in India. I don't even need to speak about people who don't even have a policy. You can easily guess how vulnerable they are when it comes to health. Now the government says it plans to cover 10 crore poor and vulnerable families by giving them 5 lakh rupees as insurance. I don't need to tell you this, but this will require a strong funding, right? And that too, it has to be funded by the government, since it's a public scheme. Let's say even if the government finds it easy to fund this scheme, we then have a big problem in terms of moral and ethics. As I said, medical charges are different for those who pay in cash and those who pay with insurance. This one is going to be a government scheme, so the insurer is the government. Even if the charges will not be very high, but then we cannot eradicate the fact that there will be a big risk of overprescriptions and unnecessary hospitalization because of the extensive availability of insurance cover to the low-income families. After all, good hospitals are run by private entities and they have their own system and procedures that sometimes can bite your pocket real hard. So this is going to be a major problem that is expected when this scheme is fully rolled out. But let's look at the positive side too. Since the scheme is aimed towards poor families, then we are assuming it will be available in rural areas too. That means the scheme is expected to boost demand and enterprises in rural areas because it will motivate private players to provide health coverage in rural and poor class of India. There are many treatments and surgeries that the people in rural areas need, and it can be covered under the scheme, and who knows, it can make healthcare and medicine affordable to a large section of the population. So these are subtle moves by the government that makes big changes. Of course, it will take time, but somewhere it needs to start. And not to forget, we will have to keep an eye on it as to where it turns. Alright, let's go to the next point. I want you to again pause the video and read this point. So when we talk about tribal students, we are referring to the scheduled tribes community. So scheduled caste and scheduled tribes are various groups who have historically suffered from extreme social, education and economic backwardness. If you look at the Constitution of India, Article 341 and 342, it talks about the recognition. So the whole idea behind this is to provide an opportunity to the hardworking people of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes so that they can compete with each other in all domains. But right now, let's talk about scheduled tribes because they are much more backward when compared to scheduled castes. And a very small number of tribal people have been benefited by the government policies and programs. If you want to understand the tribal situation in India, it goes something like this. Almost all states have tribal people. In total, India has around 450 tribes approximately, or maybe a little more than that. And these tribal people belong to various economic, social, religious and linguistic categories. In fact, if you go even more deeper, there are differences within the tribes based on levels of development and their tribal size. And then there are very small tribes as well as very large ones. And then there are nomadic tribes who move from one place to another. And then there are settled tribes. So you see, there is no clear criteria in the constitution for specifying a community as a scheduled tribe. And then Supreme Court has faced many cases regarding what are the conditions to retain a tribal status of a person. And if at all an outsider wants to become a member of a tribe, let's say by an act of marriage, then they have to be accepted by other members of the group. So you see, there's a lot of discrepancies, and because of this complication, there are many who falsely claim themselves to be a part of a tribe. Clearly, you see, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And quite a lot of time, the government finds it too lazy to do that. But anyhow, if there's any development in their status in terms of education by giving them residential schools, and if you see, the Eklavya Residential School scheme isn't new. It has been around for many years now. However, I believe the government is interested in expanding it, so it's a good step. But then just keep in mind the fundamental problems that exist for the tribal people in India. Alright, I want you to read this point. Now, let me quickly tell you about all these three schemes. It will be a revision even if you have heard of it. So the first one is Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Now, it is initiated by Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. The aim of this program is to safeguard the health of women and children by providing them with a clean cooking fuel, which is LPG. Because due to conventional sources of energy like coal, firewood and dung, the smoke from it is causing household pollution and it affects the health of women and children. So this program was launched on May 1st, 2016, and till now more than 2.5 crore beneficiaries have benefited from the scheme. Now it is primarily focused towards women's empowerment in rural India. That's why the gas connection is issued in the name of women of the household who are below the poverty line. Now identification of the below the poverty line families will be done through socio-economic caste census data. Now, economic caste census data is conducted by Ministry of Rural Development by doing a comprehensive door-to-door collecting information and data across the country. Now, this scheme has also been proven to boost Make in India project as the domestic manufacturer for LPG equipments, which will increase and give rise to employment. Alright, the second scheme is Saubhagya scheme. It's a short name given to Pradhan Mantri Sahaj Bijli Har Ghar Yojana scheme. The aim of the scheme is to supply free electricity connections to the poor and at very low cost to others. Because there are still many poor families that make the use of kerosene lamps. So this scheme has been aimed towards catering those poor households with no electricity. There's another name given to this scheme. You may come across this name, Garib Kalyan, which means the welfare of the poor. And if you see, this scheme will boost growth because electricity is important for almost all economic activities. So to identify poor families to whom electricity will be given for free, the government will make use of the socio-economic and caste census data. And for others, it will be given at the rate of 500 rupees. So basically, this scheme is primarily meant for rural areas, which have the vast majority of households without power connection. And the third one is Swachh Mission. It is a campaign in India that aims to clean up the streets, roads, and infrastructure of India's cities, smaller towns, and rural areas. The objectives of Swachh Bharat includes eliminating open defecation through the construction of household-owned and community-owned toilets, and establish an accountable mechanism of monitoring toilet use. So it is run by the Government of India. The mission aims to achieve an open defecation-free India by 2nd October 2019, which is also the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. And the aim is to construct 12 million toilets in rural India. Let's go to the next point. Loans to women's self-help groups will increase to Rs 75,000 crore in 2019 from 42,500 crore last year. So whenever you hear the word self-help group, immediately think of finance at a small scale. So basically these are a village-based financial committee, and it usually consists of 10 to 12 local women. Yes, you have heard it right. There are only women because a mixed group of both male and female is generally not preferred. And these kind of groups are also found in other countries of South Asia and Southeast Asia, but it is more active in India. So what happens is all the members of this group, usually they are located in villages, and what they do is they come together and they bring all their resources, and I'm talking about financial resources. Then in a systematic order, they lend money to the member who requires the most. You see, it's a mutual agreement to contribute to a common fund to meet the emergency demand of a member. I'll give you a good example just to make you understand, and I think you are aware of it. In a lot of cities, I'm not sure whether it happens in all cities, so local colony people run a small chit fund among their colony members. So these are not registered chit funds, so households of a colony participate in it. They keep some money to this one person who keeps it with herself or himself, and on the basis of some lottery system or sometimes need, whosoever's name comes, they give the money to that person so that you can have a lump sum amount, or else you had to go to a bank and ask for a loan, and it will take some time to get that kind of money. You see, on the basis of mutual help, you are getting a lump sum amount for whatever that you need it for, and then every month you have to repay certain amount. And in the next month, someone else gets the lump sum amount. So I hope you're getting it. So this is how the self-help group operates. Now, initially, no one will have that much of money, right? I mean, people in villages will have apprehensions in getting themselves involved in such a teamwork. So what the government does is, initially, the government starts lending small amounts of money. If you're making proper monthly payments and you're not involved in some wrong things, then the government starts to form a group by making you meet another person who's like you, so that like-minded people can start forming a group and help each other. And also you see it becomes self-sustainable, and ultimately if the government wants, it can pull itself out of it. So I hope now you understand what self-help group is. Alright, let's go to the next one. The government has launched Operation Green to address price fluctuations in potato, tomato and onion for the benefit of farmers and consumers. Now, what is Operation Green? The idea behind Operation Green is to double the income of farmers by the end of 2022. So by green, you can figure out that it's about vegetables. An operation is essentially a price fixation scheme that aims to ensure farmers are given the right price for their produce. And it is also to control and limit the sudden fluctuations in the prices of onions, potatoes and tomatoes. And you have seen that quite a lot of time. These three vegetables, their price just shoot up like anything. So this scheme purely relies on the minimum support price. Now, minimum support price is an important part of India's agricultural price policy. Remember this. The minimum support price is announced by the Government of India at the beginning of the sowing season for certain crops, and also on the basis of the recommendation of the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. Now, whenever the government sets this minimum support price, it generally affects the farmers because depending on the price, they decide whether how much of land needs to be allocated to that particular crop, or what is the quantity of crop that needs to be produced in order to earn profit. So it is in this angle that the minimum support price becomes a big incentive for the farmers to produce more quantity. And the next point is about rural haats. Now, what is a haat? A haat is a bazaar. Most often it is called as a haat or a hut. It is an open air market that serves as trading venue for local people in rural areas. Now, these kind of bazaars are very common in Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India as well. So these kind of bazaars are conducted on a regular basis, that is once, twice, or 3 times a week, or in some places every 2 weeks. And moments back, I told you that the idea behind Operation Green is to double the income of farmers by the end of 2022. So Government of India has two major problems, remember that, with respect to agriculture sector. One is to maintain food security of the nation, and the other is to make income security for the farmers. Now these are two core principles on which the Indian government looks at the agricultural sector. Remember this. So when the government is developing and upgrading 22,000 rural haats into Gramin Agricultural Markets, I think you can clearly see the intention of the government. It is saying that by this kind of development, we are going to improve the income of the farmers, and the government is also modifying the rural market into a bigger market so that the produce of the farmer reaches to the maximum people. Now let's go to the next point. So MSP is the minimum support price for all unannounced kharif crops will be 1.5 times of their production cost like majority of rabi crops. So institutional farm credit raised and all these things are there. So just pause the video and read. By the way, I have a video on major crops of India. You can search for it, and in that I have spoken about what is rabi and kharif crop in detail. I'll put the link in the description as well. If you want, you can have a look at it. So let me tell you about kharif crops in brief. They are also known as monsoon crops. That means kharif crops are sown at the beginning of the monsoon. That is around the month of June and July. And these crops are harvested right before the onset of winter. That is around September and October. Now, some of the kharif crops are jowar, paddy, millet, maize, soybean, then turmeric, groundnut, cotton, and sugarcane. I also have a map on which I have located all the states that grow kharif crops in India. The map is available on Instagram. For those of you who don't know, there's an Instagram account which is part of this channel. It goes by the name of Geography Simple. You can find that map there. I'll put the link in the description. So anyways, now you know what kharif crop is. The Government of India procures kharif crops from the farmers at a minimum support price. It also procures rabi crops as well, but for this video and in this point, I am just referring to the kharif crops. And the government has decided to keep the minimum support price for all the kharif crops at least 1.5 times more than its production cost. And I don't need to tell you again that the whole idea is to double the income of the farmers by 2022. And these prices are declared by the Commission for Agricultural Costs and Prices. So to know more about how the government sets the minimum support price, you must read about Swaminathan Committee, which is also known as National Commission on Farmers. And the whole idea behind this commission is to build a system for food and nutrition security, then sustainability in farming system, and to improve the quality and cost competitiveness of farm goods. So I recommend that you read the report once if you want to know more about it. So now the question is, why does the government buy crops from the farmer? Basically, the government has an obligation, which is to support the National Food Security Act. So under this law, the center must bear the cost of providing 75% of the India's rural population 5 kilos of food grain per month at highly subsidized rate. And this is to be sold through the public distribution system, which is your ration shop. On behalf of the government, the Food Corporation of India does this procurement work. Now, if you see it from a farmer's perspective, it's a good deal for him because he knows that whatever he produces, at least the government is going to buy a bulk portion of it. However, the government rates are always lower than the market rates. But then farmers also don't have the ability to directly go and sell in the market because it's a huge, lengthy, time-consuming process. So they rely on the government. But then there are some farmers who are not very happy with the government rates. And also sometimes the government officials reject the quality of farmers' produce based on a certain standard. So in that case, it's a loss to the farmer. And surprisingly, the state government sometimes don't have the fund to procure these crops from the farmers. Now, if you take the example of the state Assam, there the state government does not have the funds to give the minimum support price to the farmer. So the whole idea of minimum support price in Assam exists only on papers. So you see, it's a vicious cycle. When the government gives a certain price, the farmers don't like the price. When farmers have enough to give the government, then the government doesn't have the money to buy it. And then there are some crops like maize, millet. The government doesn't know what to do after procuring it. Now that discourages the farmers to grow that, because if you're not getting a demand for a particular crop, why would you grow it? So you see how this entire situation gets complicated. So now in the budget, the government says that they have increased the funds, but quite frankly, the mechanism needs to be reviewed. And for reasons like this, sometimes I feel budget is simply a speech of the ruling government, where the government boasts how much money they have allocated for so-and-so schemes. And if you see, most of the time, the figures or the allocation amount is higher than the previous year's budget. But what needs to be seen is that the system and the mechanism is broken in most of the schemes. And then you realize, what's the point of increasing the funds for a broken system? And for this reason, I think budget is just a speech, and very few really understand what's in it.